If it's Thursday, great expectations and new escalations. President Trump struggles to fulfill some key campaign and presidential promises as Russia keeps pummeling Ukraine and U.S. trading partners decline to bend to the administration's will on tariffs. Plus, the latest fallout in Texas as officials search for more than 170 people still missing, and residents begin to return to what's left of their flood-ravaged homes. I'll talk to a Texas congressman who says it's long past time to strengthen rural America's weather warning systems. And a federal judge moves to temporarily block President Trump's birthright citizenship ban nationwide. A major test of the judicial branch's authority following last month's landmark Supreme Court ruling. Hi there and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, where after successfully signing his domestic policy legislation into law last week, President Trump is now struggling to make good on several other key promises. Starting in Ukraine, a problem Mr. Trump promised repeatedly to solve on day one of his presidency. Now, as President Trump is clearly growing increasingly frustrated with President Putin.
We get a lot of bull thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
The president now saying that he's reviewing a bipartisan sanctions package against Russia and is resuming weapons delivery to Ukraine. It is a remarkable shift from the president's Oval Office rebuke of President Zelensky just a few months ago, when he told Zelensky he had no cards to play. Overnight, Russia, seemingly unfazed by President Trump's threats, launched another major assault on Ukraine, firing close to 400 drones and over a dozen missiles at Kyiv and other cities across the country. Officials in Kyiv say 2 people were killed, 14 others were injured in the capital city. Today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, on the sidelines of a summit of Southeast Asian nations. Speaking to reporters, Secretary Rubio said that Russia presented a, quote, new and different approach to ending the war in Ukraine. But he echoed President Trump's frustration with the lack of progress toward a ceasefire.
I echoed what the president has said, both disappointment and frustration at the lack of progress in peace talks or in a path forward. So we'll continue to engage. There were some ideas exchanged today, some viewpoints that they expressed to us that I'll take back to the president for his consideration, and hopefully it will lead to something. I don't want to overpromise.
And the president is also struggling to fulfill his promises on his trade agenda. The White House promised 90 deals in 90 days. And on Sunday, Treasury Secretary Bessent said this.
When we send out the 100 letters to these countries, that will set their tariff rate. So we're going to have 100 done in the next few days.
But just 22 letters have been sent out, and no new deals have been reached beyond the 3 frameworks of deals with China, the UK, and Vietnam, which were reached prior to this week's deadline. But it is his letter to Brazil, which is one of the few countries that runs a trade surplus with the U.S., that is raising particular eyebrows. President Trump saying he will impose massive 50% tariffs on the country, in part because of its treatment of a former president and Trump ally, Bolsonaro, who is facing charges of plotting to overturn Brazil's 2022 elections, I should say, that resulted in his defeat. In his letter to Brazil, President Trump called the investigation an international disgrace and a witch hunt, similar to the language that he's used to describe his own legal challenges. Joining me now, our team of reporters, NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung, and with me on set is NBC Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent and Chief Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell. Yamiche, let's start with you. As far as we know, there's still no sign of these promised 100 tariff letters that Secretary Bessent promised. Where does the White House stand on those letters, and are there any new trade negotiations? Also, if you can, unpack President Trump's frustration with Brazil.
Yeah, well, that's a big question, and there are really two distinct parts of that. There's the part about whether or not we're going to see more trade letters, more trade deals. President Trump, as well as the Treasury Secretary and other White House officials, have continued to insist that the deals are coming, that they were close with a number of countries to announcing deals or frameworks of deals. We haven't seen any new deals. We've only seen a couple, really, I think only 3 or 4 from Vietnam, the UK with China. But it's a big question of whether or not there are going to be other deals mentioned, and sort of what President Trump is going to do. I think that's also why you're seeing him sort of have this ultimatum where he's telling countries, okay, if we can't get to a deal, here's what you're going to pay on August 1st. That being said, the president, of course, has marketed himself as the world's best deal maker. So part of this is actually pressure to continue to kind of keep up that image of him being able to negotiate for America's best interests. Now, when you talk about Brazil, this is really interesting because the president's talked about trade and economics in a very sort of black and white way, in that he's like, America is being taken advantage of. Here's the trade deficits. That's why we're focusing on these countries. When it comes to Brazil, he's mixing in politics in a very unique way. When it comes to President Bolsonaro, he is, of course, the former president of Brazil. He is charged and is on trial right now with planning a coup d'etat and saying that in 2022 that he was essentially trying to hold on to power illegally because he lost the 2022 election to a leftist political figure that is now the current president of Brazil. He's sort of a far-right figure in the politics. He was also, as we're showing people, was at the White House several times during President Trump's first administration. President Trump has fiercely defended him and said that he is someone who he admires. He even had the nickname the Trump of the tropics at one point. So the president here is essentially saying to Brazil, well, I don't like the way that you're treating President Bolsonaro, former President Bolsonaro, and as a result, I'm going to increase your tariffs. The interesting thing here is that the president of Brazil has already fired back. He says that Brazil is a sovereign country and they're not going to be lectured to by President Trump. So where this goes next is a big question, but it is very interesting to see politics mixing into economics because it could happen in other countries as well, Ryan.
Okay, Amy, stand by. We've got more to talk to you about, but let's turn to Brian now on this tariff question. Obviously been a lot of back and forth for months now on tariffs and trade deals. Sometimes these trade deals take years to fully come together. It seems unlikely that they can come together by August 1st. How is the economy managing all of this uncertainty, Brian?
Yeah, well, the economy doesn't appear to be that bogged down, at least for right now. And that's because many of these tariffs that we've been talking about haven't been implemented. There are a few that have been put in place, like the steel and aluminum tariffs, like some of the tariffs on China and that 10% baseline around the world. But when you look at the inflation data, we haven't seen a substantial uptick in the yearly pace of price increases, nor have we seen any sort of market deterioration in the labor market, where the unemployment rate still sits near historic lows. So the question, though, is even though the economy looks pretty good right now, could the overall impact of this tariff uncertainty, and then at some point down the line, the perhaps actual implementation of these tariffs, if there isn't a resolution and a further delay by August 1st, when would that start to take a bite into the economy? Economists that I've been hearing from have said, even if it were the case that these tariffs, let's say 50% on Brazil, 25 to 30% on the number of countries that received letters this week, even if that were to happen on August 1st, it would still take months, perhaps even not until the early part of next year for us to see the impact of that. So even though the economy looks good right now, there are kind of signs of little cracks bubbling up beneath the surface here, like, for example, lower income spending. A Bank of America Research Institute data that I just saw showed that lower income spending actually contracted on credit cards at Bank of America. These are not in and of themselves concerns about a recession, but again, things we're going to have to watch as this continues.
Brian, do you get the sense when you talk to these economists that they just don't believe President Trump's ever going to follow through? They're almost making a bet that these tariffs will never actually become a reality?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been coined taco. Trump always chickens out, that at some point, once you get closer to that deadline, well, they can't either gets kicked down the road, or there's some sort of quote-unquote framework deal with some country where we never actually see the text or the details of what is in that deal. Now, you asked the question about economists. I think an even more important question is, what do consumers think? And I think that the same kind of thinking is there. You're not going to make a decision of buying a Keurig machine based off of what you think the president is going to do on trade policy, but it's certainly something you think about. And Wall Street's not taking this very seriously either. Things have basically gone sideways. We've recovered all the losses since the post-Liberation Day, spill on Wall Street. UBS said it. They said you're really not going to try to take a look at every single Trump Truth Social post and take it seriously at this point, because the president always ends up U-turning on that.
Okay, Brian, thank you for that. Let's turn back now to Yamiche and talk about the situation in Ukraine. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that he's working with Congress on issuing sanctions against Russia Is it clear that President Trump would sign that legislation if it came to his desk? And where does his relationship with Putin stand at this moment?
It's unclear right now if President Trump would sign that legislation, though the fact that Marco Rubio is pushing for it, I think, is a sign and a signal that President Trump would likely sign it, because he has been really aligned with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He's name-checked him. He's clearly become someone who's become a really close part of President Trump's inner circle. President Trump, though, has sort of had this up-and-down relationship with President Putin of Russia. At times, he's saying, I know Putin very well. We've worked together. We've gone through a lot of things together. But then he also has been calling him crazy and saying he's lost his mind and that he doesn't understand why he's continuing to kill people indiscriminately and why he doesn't want to end the war in Ukraine. And he's pushing for an end to the war, wants the war in Ukraine to end, President Trump. So it's really interesting to see sort of where this goes. And he, of course, has also posted online that he at one point was considering sanctions, new sanctions against Russia. So it's definitely sort of a volatile situation. But we have seen President Trump criticize President Putin in a way that he hadn't in the past.
Okay, Yamiche, thanks for that. Let's bring Andrea into the conversation now. And of course, the Secretary of State playing a pretty key role in all of this. You were tracking him today. He talked to his counterpart in Russia. He said that there's the possibility of a new approach as it relates to Russia that came out of that conversation. What can we take from what Rubio had to say today?
It's very hard to say because they won't specify, of course, what this new approach is, what could be new that he is bringing back to the president. He's also the national security advisor, of course. So he's spending a lot of time, most of his time, arguably at the White House right now as well. But so he's in Malaysia on a quick, 48-hour turnaround there, a long trip to go. But in seeing the Asian allies and, Vladimir Putin's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, his hardline, very difficult foreign minister, veteran diplomat. And my take is that it's too soon to say that President Trump is really going to crack down on Vladimir Putin. I know that Lindsey Graham, you cover the Senate, you watch these people 24/7, but he's always hopeful about sanctions. We've been hearing this for years. But Volodymyr Zelensky has been waiting. These Patriot missiles, by the way, were in Poland, some of them. These were defensive weapons. They had been approved last year under the Biden administration. They were long delayed. They were supposed to be delivered. They were authorized by Congress. Many in Congress are furious that these authorized weapons were paused by the Secretary of Defense. Reportedly, according to NBC News and other outlets, without notification to the White House and to other members of the National Security Team, Defense Secretary Hegseth acting on his own. And pausing weapons for Ukraine at a critical moment in the war. And now Rubio said today that the pause was mischaracterized. It was just a pause to review whether or not those stockpiles were needed. Well, NBC's, my colleague Courtney Kuby and Gordon Lubow, they're reporting that those stockpiles were not needed, according to the Joint Staff of the Pentagon. They weren't needed for the U.S.'s own defense. So that pause sounds like a fictitious excuse. And to blame the press for, quote, mischaracterizing it, as Secretary Rubio did today, is kind of silly because it was very clear from the president's comments that he was frustrated by this unilateral decision.
Let's go back to this conversation with Lavrov. Is the threat of sanctions enough when it comes to Russia? There have been so many sanctions already applied to them, which have not forced them to roll back at all. The sanctions need to be applied for them to have any sort of real impact.
And this is legislation that hasn't even been started, hasn't been written.
Not even introduced.
Or even introduced, as you point out. And the president got tougher in his language at NATO initially last week against Vladimir Putin for the first time, and then really got tougher and a little bit vernacular and a little profane in the comments that he made just this week on camera at the cabinet meeting. But that Putin has been hitting Ukraine with the toughest, biggest missile and drone attacks of the war in the last week since the president ramped up his rhetoric. So, and since they had that conversation that was so, unsatisfactory, according to the president's own account. So it seems to me that any impatience that the president is suggesting could be temporary because he certainly, despite recent comments, has been very tough on Zelensky and Ukraine.
Okay, Andrea, thanks for being on top of it. We appreciate it. Coming up, After an update, we'll have an update, I should say, on the calls for answers and the search for the missing in Texas. I'll talk to a House lawmaker from Texas about his renewed push to strengthen the state's weather warning systems. Plus, measles cases in the United States have now reached their highest level since the disease was considered eliminated 25 years ago. The outbreak, the response, and the role of vaccine skepticism, we have it all covered. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Rescue teams continue their search for victims from last week's flash floods in Texas as crews begin clearing the debris from that catastrophic and historic flooding. Officials say the death toll is now 120, with at least 173 people missing. 96 of those killed were in Kerr County. 36 of those victims were children. At Camp Mystic, where 5 campers and 1 counselor are among the missing, families have been collecting their children's belongings. And residents who did escape are now returning to find what's left of their homes. And we're learning that officials began voicing concerns about Kerr County's flood warning system more than 9 years ago. According to transcripts from a May 2016 meeting, the then county commissioner described the system as, quote, pretty antiquated and marginal at best. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson joins me now from Kerrville with more on the recovery efforts there. Priscilla, it's been nearly a week since those flash floods. Tell us about the situation on the ground right now.
Yeah, Ryan, nearly a week since those floods and nearly a week since they have found someone alive from this flooding. There are still more than 160 people missing in this county, and that number has not changed since late Tuesday. And so the search is growing more dire, but I will tell you, these teams continue to be out here, helicopters above, people on foot, divers in the water, trying to find anything that they can to bring those families who still have missing loved ones out there some sort of closure or further information. At the same time, the calls for accountability are growing louder. We are just learning that in 2024, there was a hazard mitigation plan here in the county where it was said that there would likely be a major flood here sometime in the next year. There was, again, that discussion about possible flood warning systems, and that question was deferred. And obviously, we sit here today having had that major flooding event happen over the 4th of July. We know that the Texas legislature is going into a special session later this month where they are going to be looking at this response and holding hearings. And we are now learning that there is a select committee that is going to be formed. The first hearing is expected to happen later this month, and the second hearing will be held here in Kerrville, with officials saying that they want to hear directly from residents. They want to hear their frustrations about what happened here, what they believe went wrong. And of course, the president and the first lady will be on the ground here tomorrow. They are going to be meeting with first responders. They're also going to meet with families who have lost loved ones, who have lost everything in this tragedy. And they'll also receive a briefing from officials here. So no doubt those questions around accountability will likely continue to come up as you have people on the ground still searching for their loved ones, still dealing with the grief of loss, and also those who are trying to figure out what's next and how they will rebuild after some people have lost everything, lost their entire homes and everything in them. Ryan.
All right, Priscilla Thompson, continuing your excellent reporting down there. Priscilla, thank you so much. I'm joined now by Congressman Nathaniel Moran. He's a Republican from Texas. He's a co-sponsor of the Rural Weather Monitoring Systems Act. Congressman, again, just our thoughts and prayers are with everyone in your district and beyond who are dealing with this awful tragedy. But let's talk about the situation. Texas officials, particularly in Kerr County, have not really addressed questions about why the community was not more prepared for this flooding event. Do you feel that the community is owed more of an explanation?
Well, Ryan, I think right now the focus really should be on continuing the recovery efforts. We're still in the midst of deep grief of what these families are going through, what this community has gone through. There's certainly going to be time for time next to come to evaluate what could have been done or what should be done in the future. But right now, recovering these little girls and these young lives that were lost is of the utmost importance, and standing next to these families and grieving with them, I think is appropriate at this moment.
As a congressman, have they given you any additional information about why the flood warnings from the National Weather Service weren't communicated more widely?
Again, there will be time for a lot of that debriefing as we move forward. We filed a bill even before this happened, in fact, a couple of years ago, to address rural weather monitoring systems to try to see these storms coming and predict them before they came out. There's a lot of discussion currently about once you get the monitoring systems in place, then what about the warning systems? And I know that's really been the focus of discussion that I've seen in the last week. But these local officials, and particularly in Central Texas, I know are deeply involved in those discussions with their representatives locally, Chip Roy in particular being the one that was most affected by this, and then up through the FEMA chain of command. I was a county judge here in Smith County, which is northeast Texas, about 6.5 hours northeast of where this flooding occurred. And I was a county judge here for 6 years and the head of emergency management here. And I understand once you're in this process, right in the middle of this, there's a time later to do more analysis and evaluation. But right now, it's the time for recovery and to restore what's been lost.
And as you talked about, and as we've talked about, the records show that officials in Kirk County knew that they had a flood warning system that was pretty antiquated. And you mentioned this bill that you reintroduced right before this all took place that's designed to strengthen the weather monitoring systems in rural areas. Do you think had your bill passed a year ago that lives may have been saved?
No, I don't think it. My bill is about monitoring systems. And I know you guys interviewed Eric Sorensen earlier, who's the co-sponsor of this bill. And the question was posed to him, and the answer was correct. And that the question was posed, could there have been more done by the National Weather Service to warn of the coming storms? And he answered correctly that the staffing levels were appropriate and the warnings went out. Just was horrible circumstances in the middle of the night on a 4th of July week here in the middle of the night, and that was a tough situation to actually get the warnings out to folks. But my bill focuses on monitoring systems, in particular low-level systems here in Northeast Texas. We deal with a lot of tornadoes, and F1 and F2 systems are hard to see in these areas in rural America where you don't have radar systems next door or sporadically throughout. You've got the inability to see those low-level systems under 6,000 feet or so. So my bill is really to address those gaps in those monitoring systems around the United States. What happened in Central Texas certainly is a reminder of how difficult it is in rural America to both monitor and to warn about the coming storms and the horrific nature of some of these storms.
Congressman, you might be touching your keyboard, or we're getting kind of a sound of some feedback from your line. You're not getting a call or anything? I'm sorry to do this.
No, I'm not. No.
We're not. Okay. We're just going to take a little break to figure out what the audio issue is, because we're having a hard time hearing you as a result. So just hang with us for a second, and we'll be right back. We are still working out the technical issues we had in our interview with Congressman Moran. A lot of more important things that we need to talk to him about. Once we reestablish that connection, we'll go back to him. But we're, in the meantime, going to follow some significant developments today in the ongoing legal fight over the Trump administration's attempt to end birthright citizenship. A federal judge in New Hampshire issued a preliminary injunction today temporarily blocking President Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship. The judge also granted class action status to a lawsuit seeking to protect babies who would be denied birthright citizenship by the administration. Joining me now is NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. So this ruling comes, of course, just 2 weeks after the Supreme Court had a landmark decision that basically imposed new limits on the judiciary's ability to issue these nationwide injunctions. How is this going to play given that ruling that just came down?
Yeah, the thing that's so complicated about this case is I always imagine our audience is like, why do you keep talking about courts when I just want to find out if Trump's undoing the 14th Amendment?
Right.
It's still complicated, but basically what this judge issued is a nationwide injunction, even though the Supreme Court ruled against previous nationwide injunctions on birthright citizenship. And the reason it's different this time, and this judge thinks that he's not defying the court's order, is because this was a class action lawsuit. It was brought on behalf of future parents, or parents potential parents who are on student visas inside the United States. The way the executive order was written was not just to apply to undocumented immigrants, but anyone who wasn't here on a permanent legal status, meaning if you were here as a student and had a child, that child would not be a U.S. citizen. So because those people exist across the country, it means that this judge's order could not just apply to New Hampshire, where he's based, but it has to apply across the country. So now the question is, when this goes back up to the Supreme Court, will they say, okay, in this case, because it was a class action suit, this judge, a district judge, can issue a nationwide injunction? So it has implications not just on how far district courts can go, but also potentially on birthright citizenship.
And you're right. Our viewers are probably just wondering, when is this question, the central question here, going to be answered?
And still not, unfortunately.
Exactly. Yeah. It seems like there's so much of this technical back and forth that's playing out between the lower courts and the high court. When is the high court just going to come out and say, this is what the 14th Amendment says and this is how it's applied?
It may take something like this coming all the way back up to them for them to really have to have a hearing on the merits, because so far it's just been about the reach of these orders. There is not a judge in America who has ruled that Trump's executive order on January 20th that said children born to people who are not permanently in this country are not citizens. No one has ruled that that is legal or can stand, but they have said that absent a nationwide injunction, in some places, it could start to go into effect. So complicated, we still don't have an answer. It could go into effect in some places temporarily if the Supreme Court decides that this decision today doesn't hold. And
could this be a potential roadmap for other plaintiffs, this class action route to try and have a nationwide remedy?
And not just on this issue, but on other issues. Republican, conservatives and liberals can take a look at this and say, is this now the workaround? If you want a nationwide injunction on an issue, you've got to find some class, like students, that exist all across the country.
Okay. All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you for your reporting. Thanks. We appreciate it. And we're fortunate enough to have fixed our technical problems with our interview with Congressman Nathaniel Moran, and he joins me now. Again, Congressman, thank you for your patience. Sorry that we ran into that difficulty, but I appreciate you still being here. I want to ask you about this upcoming legislative session that's going to take place in Texas. I know you're a federal official, but obviously you're concerned with what happens at the state legislature. Is this the time right now to address these central issues related to what happened in Kerr County and beyond? But then also, they're going to talk about items like redistricting, which could impact you as a member of Congress. Is this the time to be dealing with this, especially after you told us that the focus should all be on the recovery?
Yeah, right now the focus should be on the recovery. As they move into the legislative session, they certainly should be talking about how to hopefully prevent something like this from happening again. It's critical that we're continually analyzing horrific events like this in our lives to determine how can we best prevent them in the future. The sorrow and the grief that this community and these families are going through is just unimaginable, and we don't want anybody else to have to go through that. So the state legislature has a heavy load when they go back into special session here at the end of July.
I want to get back to the redistricting question, but on what the state legislature can do right now, they want to talk about an emergency flood warning system. Is that something you think the states can pay for themselves, or should you and your partners in the federal government be trying to find a way to provide that funding stream to states? Because obviously Texas isn't the only state that can deal with these emergency flash floods.
Well, emergency management, as you know, goes from local to state to federal. The federal should only be there, really, if the local and the state officials cannot handle what is necessary and needed. I have no doubt that the local and state officials can handle this, but to the extent that federal coordination needs to be part of that, certainly the federal government wants to make sure that we're a good partner in all of these decisions, but I have great confidence in our state legislature that they can handle this state issue. You
mean that financially, like Texas has enough money to pay for it?
Yeah, I absolutely think that that they have the money to do what's necessary in this region, as in partnership with the local community, to determine what's best on the city, the county, and the state level.
Okay, now let's get back to this other issue that's cropped up as part of as part of this legislative session, and that's the idea of redistricting in Texas. Is this the time for the state legislature to be dealing with redistricting, given everything that is happening in Texas right now, or is this something that could be put off to a later date?
Well, this is not a decision that I'm a part of. The state legislature determines this. The governor determines the agenda. And certainly whatever they decide, we will roll with. We love representing the 1st District of Texas and Northeast part of the state, 17 counties, as big as the state of New Jersey. And we will love to continue to represent those folks. But to the extent that lines are redrawn, certainly we will seek to serve in humility whoever is given us.
Okay, Congressman Moran, I know you're dealing with a lot down in Texas, so we do really appreciate you sticking through with those technical difficulties, and we'll see you when you're back here in Washington.
Thanks so much, Ryan.
All right, up next, a dose of politics. I caught up with Republican Senator and Dr. Bill Cassidy, whose vote was essential to RFK Jr.'s confirmation as health secretary, about where he stands now amid the biggest outbreak of measles since the disease was considered eliminated in this country 25 years ago. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Measles cases in this country have officially reached their highest level since the disease was considered eliminated in the U.S. in 2000, in large part to declining vaccination rates. It comes as one of the most prominent longtime vaccine skeptics and purveyor of vaccine misinformation in this country is now the leader of the Department of Health and Human Services. Earlier today, I caught up with Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, who voted for Kennedy's confirmation to be HHS secretary. Cassidy's background as a medical doctor also helped convince some of his colleagues to back Kennedy. Here's what he told me about his vote. You mentioned that you were concerned about the rise in measles cases. You attributed that to vaccine skepticism. How do you reconcile that with your vote for RFK as the head of Health and Human Services?
Well, first, let's note that RFK has come out and told people that they should be vaccinated. So that's easily reconcilable. He is now saying people should be vaccinated for measles. But I'll also note some positive things that the secretary has done. People were very concerned about ultra-processed food and about food dyes in particular. Some of those have already been removed, and certainly it's given far more attention to ultra-processed food than ever would have been given. We obviously have our differences on immunizations. We need, as a government, to have a whole-of-government approach to be pushing people to understand that vaccines are safe and they prevent death, they prevent disease. But don't slight the fellow the credit he should get for having brought attention to ultra-processed foods, an incredibly important issue.
But he has changed the way that vaccines are reviewed, the way they come to market, and he still raised questions about them overall. Does that concern you at all?
Well, of course it has some concern. You're asking me that which you already know.
And while RFK Jr. has recently endorsed the efficacy of the measles vaccine, broader messaging from HHS still frames vaccinations as a personal choice. And RFK's tenure at the agency has also seen the overhaul of its vaccine advisory panel, now filled with his own picks, which include some vaccine skeptics. Meanwhile, the CDC removed the recommendations of the COVID vaccine for children and pregnant women. That move prompting a lawsuit from leading medical organizations who argue it undermines vaccine confidence. Joining me now is NBC medical reporter Erica Edwards. And Erica, let's first talk about this measles outbreak that's happened. It's only July. Could that number continue to rise, especially as we head into the fall season where usually illnesses like this start to jump?
Yeah. Hey, Ryan. So sadly, experts say there is no question the number of measles cases will continue to rise in this country, even though, thankfully, the outbreak in Texas has slowed considerably. We are in the height of summer travel season, and many cases pop up in this country because of international travel. Remember, measles is the most contagious virus that we know of on this planet. Just one case in a largely unvaccinated and unprotected community can lead to an outbreak. Ryan?
And we were showing the graph of the data there, and we see in 2019 there was also a giant spike. How does the 2025 outbreak compare both in where it's spreading and its efforts to contain it?
Yeah, so the outbreaks are similar in that they both largely affect close-knit, unvaccinated communities. In 2019, the outbreak was pretty much limited to New York. But fast forward to 2025, we now have multiple states with outbreaks, right? Texas, New Mexico, Kansas, Oklahoma, and we're seeing a much broader global rise in measles. Cases aren't only skyrocketing here in the U.S., they're also skyrocketing in Europe and Africa.
And how much do state-level laws play into the impact of vaccine skepticism? Many states either have personal or religious exemptions for both for school immunizations. Is the potential impact of the skepticism going to be seen until, not really going to be seen, I should say, until the current babies and toddlers reach school age?
You know, it's really interesting because we're actually seeing a growth in the number of states removing non-medical vaccine exemptions. In the past decade, California, Connecticut, Maine, and New York have all removed religious exemptions for vaccines in an effort to drive up those vaccination rates, and it's working. California and Maine, for example, have both seen a rise in vaccination rates. In fact, this summer, Massachusetts lawmakers are debating a similar bill.
All right, Erica, thank you for that. We appreciate it. And we're going to turn now to electoral politics with some big-name New York Democrats still holding out their endorsement for Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani after his victory in last month's New York City mayoral primary. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer would not answer my question about it yesterday as why he's yet to endorse, saying, as he said, for about 2.5 weeks that he'd meet with Mamdani soon. Fellow Brooklynite and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is also held off on a Mamdani endorsement, saying that he'll meet with him next week. A lot of meetings are going to take place. At the same time, some national Democrats have taken it even a step further. Take a listen at what former Minnesota Congressman and presidential candidate Dean Phillips said last night when asked if there's any room for Mamdani and himself in the Democratic Party.
The answer ultimately, I think, is no. You know, we do share many of the same values. In fact, most Americans share a lot of the same values. But as a political party, yes, you want diversity. You want some differences of opinion, perspective, life story, politics, and experience. But when you have socialists, in the Democratic Party, I don't know how anybody could argue that that would be beneficial for the party or for the country.
Okay, joining me on set to talk about all of this, Reese Gorman, politics reporter for Notice, Ashley Etienne, former communications director for Vice President Harris and Speaker Pelosi, and Rob Bluey, the president and executive editor of the Daily Signal. So, Reese, we've had a lot of talk from Democrats, establishment Democrats, especially about expanding the tent. But are they only talking about trying to draw in people from the right and into the middle? And I wonder if the Democratic tent doesn't include both Dean Phillips and Mamdani, who's the one that's left out of that tent in the future?
I think only time will tell, but it is definitely telling that a lot of these members are not willing to endorse Mamdani for sure. I mean, there's been, Gregory Meeks even today said that when asked if he would endorse it, I'm not sure yet. So, there's a lot of members that are skeptical of this. And I think it's a lot because Republicans for so long have tried to tie the socialist kind of anvil around Democrats' neck and try to tie them to it. And now they have the front runner to be the next mayor of this country's biggest city is a self-proclaimed Democratic socialist. And so I do feel that that is something Democrats are somewhat afraid of. But as far as the big tent party, only time will tell whether it be Dean Phillips probably feels that he's already been pushed out of the party, having to leave Congress and try to Biden. So I think that Dean Phillips might honestly feel like maybe it is a party of Mamdani at this point.
So let's see what the Democratic strategist thinks about it, actually. Is the future of the party Mamdani or is the future of the party Dean Phillips?
I don't think the party knows. I think the party is facing a 3-alarm fire. I think there's a massive identity crisis that the party's facing that is not yet acknowledged and not been honest about quite yet. It's also facing a dated, aged infrastructure problem, meaning how we tactically engage with voters. And I would say the third is a growing distrust and a trust gap between our base voters and the party. We've been bleeding our base voters since 2012, massive, massive numbers. And Donald Trump is credited with a lot of that. But it's not until we actually face up to this 3-alarm fire that we're facing and become honest about it, sober about it, and address it head on, I think we get past this. But I think what's going to be key in it is the pressures on the DNC to produce an autopsy. Produce an autopsy. Tell us what's the direction so we can coalesce around a direction and then a message and then move forward.
But and you're talking about
leadership.
Yeah, you're talking about it from a macro level, which I appreciate it. But on the micro level, is pushing Mamdani aside and not embracing him and the voters that come with him, is that a smart strategy for the future?
Well, I don't know that that is the case. I don't think his message is that far removed from what Democrats have been.
So what are they waiting
He wanted
for?
an affordability message, and Democrats have been about affordability since,
But he
the
seems to be
beginning of our party.
articulating it better than a lot of these folks that are in power.
And that becomes the problem for the party, which is the message and the messengers. But if you don't understand why you lost, why it is you have this trust gap with our most important voters right now, you're going to continue to find ourselves in this position where we're going to have all these factions fighting each other for space.
So, Rob, let's go back to a period of time. Let's go back all the way back to 2015. Can we remember that? And there was another party that had an autopsy that was trying to figure out what their future was like. And in came this outsider that sold a completely different message and took control of the party. Are the Democrats in a similar position to where the Republicans were before Donald Trump?
Perhaps they are, and a lot of those things that were in the Republican autopsy obviously were things that conservatives strongly disagreed with. They were running away from some of the very issues that Donald Trump decided to embrace, immigration being the most prominent of them, Ryan. And so I would say that with Mamdani, we have some lessons on a global scale. Look at the socialist mayor of London and the problems that are happening in that city because of the policies that he's pursued. Crime is on the rise. Homelessness is on the rise. There's a housing crisis in London. These are things that New Yorkers can expect to see if Mamdani's policies are embraced in that city. And so I think that's why you're seeing J.D. Vance come out and point to the contrast between him and the Republicans. And you're going to continue to see Republican candidates try to run against this image of him and Alexandria Cortez and Bernie Sanders. They love that moment that
But
they're
the
in.
problem with the party is that we're not arguing on the substance. We're not arguing what is socialist versus a traditional Democrat. We're not saying this is why you shouldn't vote for this guy. More than anything else, we're just demonizing him. And I think that's where we're losing ground and losing missing an opportunity to bring more voters to the table and really educate people on who we are as a party.
And I think that you hit such an important point, actually, because if you've seen these Instagram video or the social media videos, the guy right now can't even walk down a street in Midtown Manhattan without somebody stopping him for a selfie at every moment. And I understand that, policy aside, there's a bit of personality associated with that. But go ahead, Reese.
And to that point, I mean, he really did take this kind of new media approach. I mean, I don't live in New York, been to New York City twice in my life, and he was on my feed and all these creators.
Right.
Just consistently. And so it was like, I mean, he did take this kind of approach similar to what Trump did, going on all these podcasts of teaming up with these creators that younger generation especially taps into.
Yeah, and I want to push you on something here, though, Rob, because I think it's easy just to dismiss him as a socialist and say that his policies are going to destroy everything. But there's a lot of the same things that he's talking about that you see Republicans talking about, right? Josh Hawley's really worried about the impact that these Medicaid cuts are going to have on rural America, rural hospitals shutting down, saying that Republicans are kind of turning their backs on the working class. Is there more that Republicans need to do to take a lesson as to how Mamdani's message about affordability, not necessarily the policy specifically, but the message that there are people here that are hurting and want help?
Sure, I'll give you this. I do think that populist message does resonate. I mean, Trump obviously made it work, and there are a number of Republicans, including J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley, who I think found success pushing on some of those same buttons. So, yes, I would expect that he's going to continue to do so. The thing that I don't know enough about the situation in New York City, was it a vote against Andrew Cuomo, or how much enthusiasm is there for Mamdani? And so that's what we'll see obviously play out. I saw a new poll out today that shows Eric Adams is running in fourth place behind the Republican in that city. And so it's interesting to watch the New York City situation play out. I don't think it's representative of the whole country and the situation in Missouri with Josh Hawley.
Right. But let's talk about the bill and the Medicaid cuts that come along with it. Let's just to see what some of the Republicans, what their reviews are of this bill. Almost all of them voting for it. Ron Johnson saying, I'm not happy with all the things we threw in. Cynthia Lummis, I'm not comfortable that I voted for it. Rick Scott, I wanted to support the president, so this was the only opportunity to do that. Even Don Bacon, who's not running for re-election, told me yesterday that the Senate version of this bill is a mistake. Obviously, you see those quotes, Ashley, and you're probably salivating. Do Republicans have a problem here? I mean, how do they sell this bill that even they admit they don't like that much?
I mean, I just call BS on all of it. It's ridiculous. But here's if you don't mind, I would love to take a step back. What I'm seeing play out here is a massive divestment in the country. That's what this bill is. It represents a massive divestment in the country. And what I'm sort of trying to grapple with is, how does this make America great again? You know, it only weakens the nation. What is great about taking money out of the pockets of working people and giving it to rich people? What is great about massive cuts to agencies, from the Department of Education to the National Weather Service, that supports the nation and supports its people? What's great about legislating against the people who actually elected you? And these are the things that Republicans and Trump are going to have to explain to the American people. And I think the Democrats have an unprecedented opportunity and a gift to actually draw the distinctions and pressure them to explain to the American people, why is it that you think this is going to make America great?
Reese, you talk to a lot of these, particularly House Republicans, on a daily basis. How are they messaging this bill? Are they worried about it? Are they going to take it out on the road and sell it to their constituents?
I think that I reported today on how the American Action Network, which is the nonprofit arm of Congressional Leadership Fund, they have a $5 million ad campaign out, and they're touting the tax cuts and all this stuff, but they are leaving out the part that the Medicaid cuts, the SNAP cuts, all this other stuff that polls not very well. But the thing is, it's hard because you're going to have different factions pitching different parts. You're going to have like hardcore conservatives, Chip Roy's of the world pitching the deep cuts that they were able to get on the bill and going on and touting that, while you're going to have people like Mike Lawler and Dave Valdeo who are not going to want to touch that at all. Right. But then they're also not as vocal as, say, Chip Roy or whoever might be out. So it's really going to have to be kind of like threading a needle when it comes to messaging, because,
But conservatives are calling for more tax cuts.
We got to go. Stop. Everybody stop talking. I'm getting yelled at. I should never set Reese up at the end again. Lesson learned. Still to come, the unofficial start of the 2028 presidential primary season may already be here, with some high-profile names seemingly testing the waters in key states. You're watching Meet the Press now. Well, if you watch the show, you know that the calendar may say 2025, but it is a busy month in the 2028 presidential shadow primary. You're never not worrying about the presidential race. California Governor Gavin Newsom wrapped up a rural outreach tour a long way from home in South Carolina earlier this week. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear and Congressman Ro Khanna of California will be making trips to the Palmetto State, which I think hosts an early primary there for the presidential race. Other early primary states, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar will be making her second trip to New Hampshire in as many months tomorrow. And Arizona Senator Ruben Gallego teased an August trip to the Iowa State Fair. Will Iowa even be relevant? Joining me now with more is Amy Walter, the publisher and editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report, who's always thinking about the presidential election. We're lucky to have you here, Amy. So it seems like the shadow primary already kicking into gears. Yes. Anybody kind of standing out right now?
I think that the governors are trying to get themselves into position right now where they look like the front runners. Obviously, Gavin Newsom going to South Carolina, but he has been out front for months now, trying to position himself as the national sort of voice for Democrats. J.B. Pritzker, from the governor of Illinois, announced he's running for a third term, but in his announcement, he talked a lot about Donald Trump. Yeah. He talked a lot about Illinois, too, but he also talked a lot about Donald Trump. So I think those folks are positioning themselves. Pete Buttigieg has also been availing himself of many national platforms, especially those podcasts. But, Ryan, you know as well as anybody, what matters more than anything is how voters are feeling as we get into 2027, more than how they're feeling in 25. What I'm watching for is not where they are going, but where candidates who are up in 25 and 26, the Democratic candidates up in 2025 and 26, who are they asking to come and stump with them? Are they going to bring some of these high-profile governors? Are they going to bring AOC and Bernie Sanders to campaign for them in the swing states where we know the race for control of Congress will be won and lost?
There was a fundraising number that really caught my eye, and I honestly kind of not thought about Cory Booker in the vein as a presidential candidate. That kind of changed when he gave that long speech on the House, on the Senate floor, and now he posts a major fundraising number. Should he be part of this conversation?
I'm sure everybody in the United States Senate who's a Democrat should be part of this conversation. I mean, this is a deep pool. And in a large reason that we have such a deep pool, right, it's because 2024 should have actually been the time where a lot of these candidates got an opportunity to show their stuff to a broader electorate. There is pent-up demand from Democratic candidates and voters to go out there and sell a vision of who the Democratic Party is and what it wants to do going forward.
And do you think it's going to be a question about the vision, or is it going to be about the personality of these candidates? Because right now it seems that Democrats are struggling with both, trying to find a message that resonates along with the messenger that can best sell that message.
Well, that's true. I think at this point, though, the vision thing, as I think it was George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush was credited with saying, it becomes super, super important. Because I remember going into the 2020 campaign, what Democratic voters were the most concerned about was beating Donald Trump. That was priority number one. So the vision and the issues and even the personality didn't matter as much as who was the most winnable. By now, I think it's pretty clear that what Democratic voters are upset about is they don't really know who the Democratic Party is and what it stands for.
So I remember flying out of Iowa in 2020, covering the Bernie Sanders campaign after they had bungled that mess there, thinking Democrats will never come back here to start their presidential campaign.
Yet,
but maybe they will.
Maybe they
quickly,
will.
What's happening there?
Here's what's going to matter. Do Democrats do well in the midterm elections in Iowa? They've got a Senate race, there's a gubernatorial race that's competitive, and a number of House races. If they do well, Democrats that is, you're going to have a lot of Democrats saying, maybe we should put Iowa back on the map.
Okay. All right. We have something more important to talk about than the presidential race, Amy, and that involves you. Amy, one of our many amazing players who are going to take the field next week in the Congressional Women's Softball game. We're so excited about it. Wednesday is the annual charity game where the press team, led by Amy on the mound, takes on the bipartisan team of women members of Congress. All the proceeds from the game will benefit the Young Survival Coalition, an organization dedicated to helping young women fight breast cancer. Now, you can buy your tickets to attend the game in Washington or donate directly to the cause on the websites that you see on your screen this year. I happen to be one of the coaches of the press team.
Excellent coach
Thank
of
you.
the press team.
Thank you, Amy.
We're
Thank
counting on you.
Thank you.
Keep us on the bases. Keep us running when
we're
we
also
need to.
very excited this year, Amy. The game is going to be at Audi Field, where
Big
the
deal.
DC United soccer team plays, so that's huge. And it's going to be broadcast on the Monumental Sports Network. So we've got, not that I should be talking about other networks, but a lot of excitement.
Come on, you guys, next time you guys can.
We'll do it next time. All right. All right. Thank you so much, Amy. We appreciate you being here. That's it for us today. The news continues on with Tom Costello in for Allie Jackson.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.